Hello and welcome. My name is Dinah Bogan and I am a faculty development and coaching specialist with UAGC. I will be host of this panel. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. We've also enabled live transcription. So if you would like to use it, just click the live transcription button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of our panelists. I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves. Jackie, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, guys. My name is Jacqueline Bullis. I am a faculty support and consultant. I'm a faculty support and classroom consultant. I work with faculty affairs and have been with the university for 7.5 years about.
Andre?
Hello, my name is Andre Dodson. I am also faculty support and classroom consultant. I've been with UAGC, well, this is my second year in this department, third year total. So.
I'm Amy Erickson. I'm a faculty coach and development specialist. I've been in this role a little over a year, but I've taught for over 6 years here at UAGC.
And hello, I'm Paul Schultz. I'm a faculty development and coaching specialist, and I have been with UAGC Ashford for the last 13 years and excited to be here.
Thanks, Paul. So we're going to dive into navigating difficult conversations because sometimes the words escape me and I don't know what to say. So first of all, what makes a conversation difficult? Feel free to pop your ideas into the chat if you'd like to share what you think makes a conversation difficult. And if not, I'm going to share what we came up with. So some things that we found make conversations difficult. Emotional responses, assumptions, miscommunications, comparing yourself to others, physical and mental health. That's just a few. I'm sure there's many more. But first up, Jackie is going to start us off and talk to us a little bit more about communication theory.
Hello, everyone. So first, we wanted to see what the research said in regards to having difficult conversations. So we started by taking a look at connectivism. Connectivism is a theory about learning that addresses how learning takes place in the age of digital technology. It takes into account the rapid pace at which information is both shared and altered by the availability of technology, such as the internet, email, online social networks, and YouTube. It theorizes that this new flood of available information fundamentally changes how people learn and involves much more connection between people than in the past. Many of our lives are just like mosaic abstracts made up of people we've met and the experiences that we've had. What we believe and remember have so much to do with connection. In a world where information is literally at our fingertips or at the press of a button, it's relationships and people we learn and retain the most from. Bringing different perspectives together to learn from one another and expand on ideas is so much what this theory is. Next slide. So why is connectivism important? Well, let's start with the deficiency of connectivism. That would mean a lack of trust, understanding, connection. Without connectivism, there is no base to have a difficult conversation that will be meaningful. There's nothing that ties them to you or makes them look at you as an authority on the subject at hand. When someone designates themselves as a source of knowledge and support, it helps when difficult conversations need to happen. Remember, we want to be the examples for our students and show them how they should be treating others and responding to challenging situations. So creating a community within your course and letting others see a part of yourself through video, experiences, and demeanor helps establish a connection that can aid you in future communication and understanding. Keeping open office hours, establishing a relationship with your students, providing resources, showing them your genuine disposition and intentions. These are all examples of building trust and expanding their understanding and connecting with them on a personal level. And now Paul is going to go more into cognitive dissonance.
Sorry about that. So let's talk about uncomfortable conversations that I know we've all experienced those in the online classroom. And normally it's via email exchanges or exchanges within the classroom. Well, continuing in our research, that exchange can be sometimes uncomfortable, and that is cognitive dissonance that's occurring. And it's, really understanding the cognitive dissonance to minimize potential barriers that may impact your future communication within the classroom. So cognitive dissonance right here refers to the mental discomfort experienced by a person who simultaneously holds two or more contradictory beliefs or ideas or values. And this discomfort leads that person to basically change their attitude, their belief, or even their behavior to reduce that discomfort and restore balance. So cognitive dissonance is all about making yourselves feel better and not have that, that divide. So let's go to the next slide. To give you an idea, here's an example, and as you can see in the illustration, the difference between comforting lies and unpleasant truths, people tend to want to, be more comfortable. So in this case, here's an example, an instructor, student to instructor interaction. A student, needs more time to complete an assignment, but doesn't reach out because their past experience, they believe that the faculty is not going to help them. And so even though the instructor posted an announcement, so the student thinks, I need more time, I need to reach out to the instructor, but my past experience says they're not going to care. So the student has dissonance occurring because of their experience of negative interaction with an instructor in the past and believes this instructor will be the same. As a result, the student does not reach out and moves on, to the next assignment. Ignoring is their way of reducing their dissonance. Or they may react strongly to your feedback and grading, trying to avoid or distance themselves from the discomfort of not doing well in this assignment because it didn't match their expected result. So this unresolved cognitive dissonance can result in not only the student, but even your increased absenteeism, lower productivity performance, and a various range of counterproductive behaviors. So in a small way, we want to give you some examples of how you can overcome this cognitive dissonance in your communication with students. Go to the next slide. So reducing cognitive dissonance, address the discrepancies between feelings and actions. So first of all, again, in my example, let's let go of assumptions. Students often hesitate reaching out for help because they make assumptions about how their request will be received. Dissonance. Instructor Should help me, instructors are uncaring. They can have those two thoughts at the same time. Faculty can help students overcome these assumptions by showing empathy and a willingness to work with the students. Faculty can be proactive, and that's something that we, the culture of care can really help to a student to overcome their cognitive dissonance in the classroom. How about also, number two, address fallacies? A lot of times we can think, I struggled, as a student, I didn't get, extra help, but I found a way to succeed. Or flexibility may lead to less rigor in the classroom. We are all unique individuals. And so trying to remove those barriers and showing more flexibility to our students is going to be such a positive thing and will help reduce the cognitive dissonance that then really it increases the kind of negative interactions we can have with students. And so address the fallacies. Sometimes we need to let go of the things we think we experienced in order to really see what they're experiencing. And then finally, I just encourage you as an instructor, a staff member in dealing with students or your inaction, practice mindfulness. Sometimes we just need to be aware of our own dissonance, our own uncomfortable feelings when we're having conversations with our students. And I think these will help in reducing our cognitive dissonance in our conversations.
Okay. So now let's discuss having difficult conversations. So now let's connect having difficult conversations to our culture of care. The UAGC culture prizes academic challenge, holistic learning, personal development, and unconditional support for our students, all anchored in the ethic of care and accountability. So how do we promote this culture of care among our faculty? Well, we can start by making sure we extend our culture of care to our faculty. An authentic culture of care doesn't only apply to our students, but also to our faculty and staff. We also need to appreciate these difficult conversations. I actually view these conversations as an opportunity to learn from another person's perspective. To quote the great and wise Coach Paul Schultz, without difficult conversations, change doesn't happen. We can also promote this initiative by creating an atmosphere where an instructor can feel free to be heard, ask questions, and even vent when need be. This safe space is a very meaningful way to demonstrate that our culture of care extends to us all. We are now effectively walking the talk by demonstrating our care for our faculty's feelings and opinions. It is up to us in faculty affairs to emulate the behaviors we're asking our instructors to extend to our students in our every interaction. This includes embracing the difficult conversations. You just never know how far a small gesture can go. Next slide, please. A few other ways we promote our culture of care among our faculty are by striving to increase faculty engagement and sense of belonging within our community. Our faculty affairs team is responsible for creating the opportunities for our faculty to contribute to the planning and execution of strategic institutional goals. A key faculty affairs initiative is a unified faculty body called One UAGC Faculty, wherein full-time and associate faculty are equally knowledgeable about, engaged in, and prepared to contribute to the institutional game plan and initiatives. To sum it all up, by creating a community within our faculty population, we can help establish a connection that will aid in future conversations, even the difficult ones. Next up is Diana, who's going to give you some tips on how to get through the actual difficult conversation.
It helps if I unmute. Thank you, Andre. Communication is complicated. It's a process with lots of moving parts, including turning on your microphone when you're trying to speak. So you have to consider lots of different things. What are you trying to say? Who are you saying it to? How are you going to deliver your message? Where is the conversation going to take place? What kind of distractions or noise will there be? How will each person's personal experiences impact the conversation? So lots of things to consider, which means there are lots of things that can go wrong. So what can we do? Effective communication begins with mindset. How are you thinking about your communication? In Stephen Covey's chapter on empathetic communication in his very popular book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you might have seen it before. He says, if I were to summarize in one sentence the single most important principle I have learned in the field of interpersonal relations, it would be this: seek first to understand, then to be understood. This principle is the key to effective interpersonal communication. So what does that mean? Understand first before being understood. We hear buzz terms like active listening, listening skills, validate and restate. My husband says to me all the time, what I hear you saying is. And this means we need to listen to understand what the other person is saying, but we need to take it a step further. What are they feeling? What is their intention? You need to be empathetic, remembering that we are all individuals with our own unique lived experiences, and no one's story is the same. When you start to have that kind of mindset about communication, you'll be navigating what you once called a difficult conversation like a champ. So, effective communication, be prepared. Knowledge is power. Be clear on what you want to talk about, set goals, but be flexible. Be flexible. Check your emotions. Don't let them get the best of you. If an email gets you like hot under the collar, don't answer it right away. Walk away and come back. Once your conversation starts, establish a connection. Don't jump into the hard stuff right away. Exercise empathy. Like I said, listen to understand. Paul talked about not making assumptions. Instead, ask questions to clarify, validate the other person's feelings. When you're getting ready to wrap up, make sure everyone knows what the next steps are. If there are action items, make sure you're clear about what they are and who's responsible for them. Acknowledge and thank the other person for spending time with you. Whether it was a face-to-face conversation or an email, they took time to listen to what you were saying, and you should acknowledge that. And then don't forget the follow-up. If you said you were going to check back in with them in 3 days, keep your word. That helps build trust. It helps build community with the person that you're communicating with. And it's a way to continue to show that empathy, respect, and care that you're trying to promote in the classroom. Okay, so before we move on to the next topic, I just want to see if there's any questions, any comments, if anybody wants to pop into the chat. But if not, we're going to let Amy talk about resilience and empathy.
Great, thank you so much. I guess I'll just give a little more time to see if there are any questions in the chat. But I'll just say, Diana, that quote you shared there reminded me of another quote by Cal Newport in his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. He said, a failure in business is common, but a failure in relationships should never be. And so when I think about that, I think about the same should hold true for education, right? If we fail in our relationships with our students, that should never happen, right? So I don't see any questions coming in. So I just wanted to reiterate, we've talked about the culture of care here at UAGC and its relation to communication with students and the impact that can have on student success. I think it's also really important to consider, Diana gave some wonderful examples of things one should consider prior to embarking on a challenging discussion with a student or having these difficult conversations. In 2008, Gutierrez noted that, and this is a quote, secondary stressors are challenges that students from non-dominant groups face, such as discrimination, which makes students vulnerable and exacerbate the consequences of inequitable schooling conditions. So if we keep things like that in mind, that maybe our students are experiencing some of these secondary stressors, I think it should really change how we approach a conversation. we can do our best to create a classroom environment free of toxic elements like racism, sexism, and discrimination of any sort. But that does not mean that our students are not encountering such secondary stressors in other elements of their life. So this is where empathy is so important. We need to understand. And if you could just advance the slide, please. We need to understand that secondary stressors and even some primary stressors, such as poverty, fear, scarcity, displacement, and racism, that these can lead to trauma, stress, poor achievement, truancy, and even dropping out. So it's really important to think about these things instead of perhaps getting frustrated with a student. Keep in mind that these may be experiences that they have had, and to be gentle in your communication. In addition to secondary stressors, and again, if you could forward the slide, please, Diana. Instructors are also encouraged to consider the physical, psychological, and emotional toll of adverse childhood experiences and how they can contribute to certain behaviors or even fear in the classroom. Different types of abuse, different types of neglect. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of our students have experienced these, but imagine for a moment if they had. Would you really come at them in a harsh or demeaning manner? How is that going to help anything? Just having this information about secondary stressors that students from non-dominant groups experience, understanding that adverse childhood experiences are more common than we think. This should really change your approach to your students and your communication strategy. I had an instructor once email me and say, I'm so frustrated. This student waits till the last minute to submit work, and I don't know why. And it's always just at the 11th hour. And I wrote back and said, well, consider having a conversation to see if everything's okay, to see if maybe this student works the night shift. Maybe this student is in the military. Maybe this person has obligations, caring for siblings, parents, grandparents, whatever it may be. But I also reminded this instructor, I said, there's a pretty decent percentage of our students who are homeless. And it changed everything. This instructor said, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How could I be so careless? And so I think we try to keep in mind that, we talked about in another meeting, we assume that everyone has the same experience. As Thoreau said, we're limited by the narrowness of our own experience, but we have to have more of an imagination, and we have to have more empathy to have that kind of imagination about someone else's experience. So if you could go ahead and please forward the slide. So I did some research with Benita Bryant, and I believe Diana is going to, or perhaps Jacqueline is going to put the link in the chat. We did a presentation, a poster session on resilience in the classroom. And empathy figured into that, as well as communication. In fact, communication seemed to be the intersection of this Venn diagram here on the left. As you can imagine, there are tens of thousands of articles on resilience in the classroom. And so we narrowed our focus to look at classroom behaviors that could bolster and even boost resilience. And we found that developing relationships, removing fear in the classroom, and showing and providing support were three themes that kept coming up that we felt were things that we could all do in the classroom. And I specify that because some universities have entire institution-wide resilience programs. They have apps, they have outdoor adventures, they have seminars and modules that all students have to complete. So we figured that not all people have access to that sort of thing. So we wanted to provide some strategies to build resilience in the classroom that one could do on their own. So as I noted, developing relationships was one of the themes that we saw again and again. And this can be done with communication. Showing that you care about a student, sharing your own experiences with the student, showing interest in their lives outside of the classroom, checking in when you see a student maybe perhaps didn't submit something, an email like, I know you were sick last week. Is everything okay? Are you feeling better? Do you need an extension on this assignment? Let's work together. I'm here to support you. That sort of relationship building communication. Reducing fear in the classroom is so important. If you have students in your classroom who are maybe a bit peripheral to higher education, maybe they're the first one in their family who's gone into higher education, we know from the neuroscience that fear will stop the cognitive process. So we need to reduce fear in the classroom. And some people like to do that with self-deprecating humor. And I say self-deprecating because you never want humor to be pointed at a student. Making fun of yourself is fine, but you never want to aim humor at someone else in a negative way. Some people do it by sharing their own failures in the classroom. Students love to hear that we are not all perfect students, that we did not all graduate at the top of our class. I had one student email me and say, how did you get to where you are today? And what she really needed to hear was that my path was not linear at all. She loved to hear that I was a Division I coach for 10 years, 13 years. She loved hearing that then I did something entirely different, that I'd done recruiting and I'd done being a director of a small graduate school. She loved hearing that I didn't go right into the classroom. And it was exactly what she needed to hear. So, but also sharing how maybe you missed the mark, how you had similar fears when you went into classes. We have an instructor here at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and he starts out a class saying, okay, everybody, this is a perfect place to ask questions, to make mistakes. I don't expect you to know everything. And you can almost feel, students' shoulders relaxing when you give them that permission to make mistakes and to not be expected to know everything that you're teaching in the classroom. So this reducing fear can be done with communication, with emails, with responses and discussion boards, with inspiring feedback. Maybe they didn't get everything right on an assignment, but there had to be something that was good about it, right? So building on those strengths to reduce that fear. Showing and providing support. So this could be in the form of encouraging emails again, or encouraging announcements to the entire class. But it could also be sharing university resources. If you got a chance to listen to this morning's keynote, I was just talking about this with Andre. We both loved that instructors who shared just some university support services in their introductory session with students. They found the students had far greater success in the class because right at the start of the class, you demonstrated to the student that you were there to provide support, and that showed that you cared about them. And so all of these things are really, can all be accomplished with communication that's laced with empathy. So I'll turn it back over to Diana now.
Thank you, Amy. We're just going to pause for a moment to see if there's any questions or comments. I just wanted to hit on what you said about your slide about resilience and adversity and those traumas that come with everyone. And we don't know what they are because, we all have our own experiences. But it's interesting because at UAGC, our students are facing adversities all the time. You look at non-traditional students and you look at the statistics behind them. They're, over 25. They are working. They have children. There's lots of women, minorities, lots of students who qualify for Title IV funding. So, we're talking about students that are juggling multiple responsibilities, facing income problems, poverty. Someone mentioned the number of students who are homeless. We don't even think we forget how many things that our students struggle with. So resilience is such a huge thing to consider in the classroom.
That's so true, Diana, because, we hear some instructors kind of push back on some of these ideas and say things like, well, nobody cared about my feelings. Well, you were 18 to 22 years old. You didn't have 3 kids at home, and maybe a spouse who was out of work, and maybe you were facing some a pretty big exam for maybe the course, your program. When you think about how some people who've gone to school and have had this relatively different experience because they were 18 to 22 years old. You're right, remembering that these people have lots of things they're juggling. I have students who say to me, I'm going to be late with this assignment because I'm going to be in a submarine for the next 2 weeks. And you think, okay, that just makes my knees go weak thinking about being in a submarine. So first of all, thank you for your service. Are you, safe? It's no problem. As Andre mentioned, it does not negate rigor if you're flexible with students. It's not anything against you or the university to be flexible and help them in these situations, and to show the kind of empathy that we certainly would have wanted if we'd had those obstacles to overcome. So when I hear people talking about pushback or saying things like, I didn't have to do these things, or nobody cared about my feelings, or, that sort of thing. It's like, well, you're a very different population, perhaps. And, but to keep in mind that, again, this isn't about you and your lens, and to stop being so self-referencing and instead look outside of you and say, here's another individual with a whole host of experiences. And those experiences could be vastly different from mine, and I have no idea. But my job here is to support them and to help them in this academic journey, not just in my class, but throughout. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Diana. It's such a great point.
And also, Amy, like, just to piggyback on, everything you were just saying, and Diana as well, it kind of brings up what Paul was saying in cognitive dissonance, because maybe they actually had a very similar journey. Maybe the instructor also was an adult learner that had 3 kids and a full-time job, and then continued to get, all these degrees and triumphed over their all the issues and roadblocks they had in their way. But not everyone is the same. Like you had said, like Paul had said, we are all very different. Our levels of resilience is different. Our level of stress and what stressors do to us is different. I might be able to handle a mountain, but that mountain might be a molehill to someone else. So it varies per person. And I know this is like the hardest thing, right? Because I think we're all just so intrinsically individual, and we think about ourselves a lot that we compare. And the reality is you have to step back and realize that, my hardship is not their hardship, even if we went through something very similar. How we view it is so different. And so I encourage instructors to step back and realize that that's what makes us all so unique and wonderful, is that what you had handled, maybe someone else can't, but then they could take on something you cannot imagine. And that is all the things that make us so unique.
It's so true, Jacqueline. Look even inside just individual families, how vastly different people are. Some people can take on all kinds of trauma and stress, and other people crumble. So it's not a judgment. It's not. It's just people are vastly different, and their bandwidth is vastly different. I have a friend who has 5 children. I don't know how she does it. I have 5 animals. You know what I mean? I think that's stressful. So, we just have very different levels of different kind of bandwidths. And so to respect that. And when someone asks for help or reaches out, or if you in turn reach out and say, how can I help you here? I noticed your work's late each week, and maybe we should develop some new deadlines that would accommodate your schedule. Would that take some stress off of you? I don't see how that would be offensive to anyone, instructors included. And again, it's not about, I talked about inspiring feedback. That's not to say that we don't acknowledge when there are errors in the work, of course, but let's also try to find something that was really strong about the work, or that maybe could be built and made up even stronger, instead of just always focusing on what was wrong. I feel like sometimes faculty feel like they have to, I'm speaking from personal experience here too, that they almost have to legitimize the grade they're giving by calling out all the errors in the work. Does that make sense? And so they focus on all the errors instead of like, what was really good about this? You know, what do you think that, you know, writing, for example, is so personal, and wouldn't it be lovely to see some really inspiring feedback on that writing as well? Maybe the topic sentence isn't perfect, but maybe the lead out sentence is great, and maybe the use of you know, evidence within the paragraph is fantastic. So, you know, to kind of make sure that that feedback is a balance. Obviously, you want to address things and help students get better, and to make sure that they are making progress, but also to couch it in terms and couch some of the content in terms that will inspire versus deflate the student.
And I'll just say something Jackie mentioned, that even if somebody had a similar experience, you know, and we are unique, but you know, I have a 15-year-old, and we've been watching movies lately that were released in like the 80s or 90s, and he was like, why did they do that? I don't remember what it was. Oh, that there was a traumatic event, and then they went to school the next day. And he was like, why would there be school? Why would they go to school? They just went through this thing. I'm like, it was the 90s. You just kept going. but we know better now, right? We've learned that when you have a traumatic event, maybe you don't go to school the next day. Maybe you take time to give yourself a mental health day. We know better. You know, just because you had to pull yourself up from your bootstraps, which is totally fine, and we're glad you were successful, it doesn't mean that we have to keep forcing students to experience those same barriers. We can help them. If we can help them, we should help them. You know, research shows that if you remove those non-class related life events, that students can still be successful. So we just know different things now, and that's why we don't need to keep doing that. Just because we used to do it that way doesn't mean we have to keep doing it that way. All right, I am going to talk a little bit about feedback. Amy kind of introduced us to this idea of empathy and feedback, and I'm just kind of going to continue that, how to be empathetic and positive and supportive while you're providing feedback. Like Amy said, you know, people want to justify their grade, so pointing out all the errors. But first, what is feedback? We talked a little bit about the communication process earlier. So feedback is a response given to the receiver after decoding a message from the sender. That is the basic definition of what a response is, right? Feedback can be verbal, nonverbal. It can be spoken, written, intentional, unintentional. In the classroom, feedback could be summative comments on an assignment. It could be a discussion response. It could be an announcement, a private message. Feedback doesn't have to be evaluative. Feedback is a formative assessment. It can allow faculty to guide students toward meeting learning outcomes. So what is quality feedback? So if we look at the definition from Quality Matters in their rubric, feedback should be constructive. So you should offer solutions. Don't just point out what they did wrong. Describe how they can improve their future performance. Be specific. Don't be vague. Avoid saying things like, your argument would have been stronger with more details. Well, what details were missing? Identify the specific areas where students could do better. Provide specific details and examples. Use action verbs so that improvement can be measured going forward. Make feedback sensitive by using positive language, avoiding negative language. Keep your tone positive and supportive. Avoid saying things like, you did not put much effort into the assignment. How do you measure effort? How does this help the student improve going forward? Feedback doesn't need to be critical to be helpful. And finally, feedback needs to be balanced. Don't overwhelm the students with too much feedback. There is such thing as too much of a good thing, right? Focus on what's important by relating your comments back to learning objectives and assignment directives. Include both strengths and weaknesses. Focus on content. Remember, unless your assignment was on using APA or how to write a paper, mechanics should not take up most of your feedback. Kind of strive for that 80-20 balance. Okay, so my last point is Wheaton's law. A little known fact about me is that I will try to sneak a Star Trek meme or reference into everything. Yes, everything. So, okay, Wheaton's law isn't exactly be kind. I'm paraphrasing because this is a PG presentation. The key point here is that you should be constructive without being critical. Don't underestimate the power of word choice and tone in the online environment. We talked earlier about the communication being complicated. Put that process online without facial expressions, body language, the tone of your voice, eye contact. All of those nonverbal pieces of communication are missing. And you aren't getting that same nonverbal feedback responses from the other person to gauge how what you're saying is being received. So it's critical to not just think about what you're saying, but how you're saying it. One of our faculty members, Jessie Epshaw, presented at a recent UAGC Ed Talk, and she used this great analogy. She said, she asked you, are you the referee trying to catch every mistake, or are you the coach trying to help your students succeed? I personally like to be a coach. It's literally in my job title. So I feel like I should really kind of hedge my way towards being a coach. I also know that our students will respond better to constructive feedback rather than being criticized for getting everything wrong. Today's keynote speaker shared that research shows that instructor to student interactions lead to student success. So what you say to your students matters. So you should make it count. That is my short review of instructive feedback. We are happy to answer questions. Paul? Yes.
Well, so I love this last part because I feel like the area of instructor feedback is something that I constantly am trying to grow in. And I feel like we need to understand that online students need our positive words of support. And they are struggling with life just like we are, but they're also struggling with, working a full-time job, dealing with their kids, putting them to bed, and then they do their homework. And so whatever positive reinforcing words we can use, one of the other areas, like in Canvas, the rubric, it's just a general, description of what the student was to accomplish. In that rubric, you can actually add a comment, a personalized comment under that area in the rubric. And a lot of new instructors, I encourage them to do that just because it personalizes, okay, what they did right or what they could improve on. And so I feel like it's an area that, all instructors can really grow in. And so I love this part. Thanks, Diana.
Yeah. I think it's great too, especially because we're constantly, especially in faculty affairs and working with all the faculty amongst the university, constantly brainstorming. How do we create relationships? How do we create community? How do we connect in 5 weeks in an online setting with classes up to like 30 students? Like how do we do this? And feedback is one of those vessels and one of those pathways that instructors can really hone in on in their classroom to create that personalization, to create that connection, and to really like utilize those kind terms that they seem approachable, that they create a basis for a relationship, that students feel heard and seen by them. There's only so much that can be done in these course shells. So really feedback is always going to be top of the tier on how you can truly reach your students.
And just to say again that feedback does not have to be, the response to an assignment. You can provide feedback in an announcement. You can draw upon, you just finished grading discussions and noticed there was an overall theme where maybe students struggled with getting their peer responses in. You can provide encouraging feedback that, hey, I noticed this, let's work together to do something for next week, to really engage in the class. And it's hard because we want to provide feedback that's reflective of what the student has done. So there's always that, well, this is missing, but you can still provide quality feedback based on the student's performance that uses language that's positive. You just have to find a way to, it's about your word choice. If in my experience, when I was coaching faculty on improving their feedback, we talked a lot about if you're struggling to find things to say in your feedback, go back to the learning objectives. We talked about this recently in a course development workshop at UAGC on how to pull in course development and tie that in with feedback. It all comes down to relating your comments to helping students meet learning objectives and outcomes in the classroom. And you can do that without being critical. You can do that by still being supportive and constructive. It just takes purpose, and it takes that reflective communication skills to really focus on how you're saying things. All right. And again, if anyone would like to comment or throw in some questions, there is a chat in the Whova app and a chat in Zoom. I've been kind of poking back and forth, looking at both, but we're also happy to connect with you offline. I've put our emails in our presentation. We appreciate everyone who was able to make it today. I want to thank our panelists that joined me today, and Herminder for providing tech support and recording our session in the background. There are still several sessions left in today's lineup. I don't see any questions coming in, so I am happy to give you back a few minutes of your day so you can grab a snack before your next presentation, because it's a busy lineup. But don't forget to join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for our keynote fireside chat with Clint Smith. It's going to be really great, so I encourage you not to miss that. Enjoy the rest of your day at TLC.